Chapter 5. So you want to be amazing. From then on, there was no stopping Harry Houdini. He went all over America and all over the world. He challenged anyone to lock him into something he couldn't get out of, and he escaped from some pretty strange things, including a giant football. He also added a new element to his show, water. In 1908, Houdini debuted an entirely new trick, one that he said was the best I have ever invented. The audience in the theater was on the edge of their seats. Harry had started to show off with some of his standard acts, illusions, metamorphosis, handcuff escapes. Now he turned and walked downstage toward the audience. Stepping over the footlights at the bottom of the stage, he leaned forward as if he was about to leap into the first row of seats, and spread his arms wide. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harry boomed, his voice carried to the back row. This wasn't the shabbily dressed, quiet boy of the Dime Museum days. His personality electrified the theater. Now, for the first time ever, here today, I introduce to you my latest and greatest escape. The most amazing act ever seen on an American stage. With a flourish, Harry revealed a giant iron milk can, large enough for a small person to squeeze into. He thumped it on all sides to show how sturdy it was. Then he went off stage to change into a bathing suit, while his assistants filled the can to the brim with water. Finally, Harry climbed into the can. "As I am submerged in water," he said to the audience, "try timing yourselves, too. See how long you can hold your breath." He also pointed to one of his assistants, holding a large axe. "In case something goes terribly wrong, do not fear. My loyal assistant will smash open the can and free me. Let's just hope it's in time." With a grin, Houdini allowed himself to be handcuffed and squeezed into the can. His assistants locked down the steel cover with a massive padlock. In later versions of the escape, Harry would also invite audience members to bring their own padlocks, to close the cover even more securely. A curtain was drawn in front of the can. People in the audience held their breath. The seconds passed. A whole minute went by. By this point, most people watching were gasping for air. It is very dangerous to hold your breath for that long. And still there was no sign of Houdini. Another minute passed, then another. The audience was frantic. What if Houdini had drowned? How would anyone know? "Let him out!" they started calling. "Smash open the can! He's drowning!" Then suddenly, Harry swept aside the curtain and bowed. He was dripping wet and gasping for breath, but alive and free. And then the can stood there, still padlocked securely. It was a sensational trick. The audience couldn't get enough of it. And Harry liked playing with people's minds, too, to make the escape seem more dramatic. Sometimes he would get out of the can in a couple of minutes, and then wait behind the curtain for up to a half an hour, letting the tension build. Once everyone was terrified that the trick hadn't worked, and that Houdini was dead, then he'd make his dramatic entrance to the thunderous applause. Harry had always been a good swimmer and comfortable in the water. He also practiced a lot for this dangerous trick. He'd fill a bathtub with water and have Bess time him to see how long he could stay under. Or he'd make the water freezing cold and see how long he could stand it. This was useful for another new and even more dangerous trick, his river escapes. For this act, Harry would usually start on a bridge, surrounded by thousands of spectators. And reporters, of course. He would strip down to a bathing suit or long underwear and allow policemen to lock him into 2 or more pairs of handcuffs. Then he'd climb up on the railing, shout farewell to the crowd, and leap off the bridge into the freezing water. Splash! The audience hung over the railing, searching the water. Sometimes Houdini would pop right back up, holding the handcuffs triumphantly over his head. Or sometimes he would stay underwater longer, making everybody wait. A couple of times he even swam off underwater to someplace where he could hide. Harry always said that these were his most dangerous escapes. He warned other people not to try them, but people did anyway, and some of them died. Not only was the water dangerously cold, but sometimes the current would pull Houdini away from the boat, whereas his assistants were waiting to help him out. Once he got trapped under ice, after the current swept him away from the hole he had just jumped through. Houdini kept coming up with new and more dangerous twists for his underwater escapes. Sometimes he'd attach large, heavy objects to his handcuffs, so he'd get pulled down to the bottom of the water faster. Or sometimes, after being tied up, he'd also be nailed inside a wooden box, which was then dropped into the river. He did bridge jumps in cities all over the U.S., from Rochester, New York, to Boston, Massachusetts, to New Orleans, Louisiana. There was no way to charge money for these kinds of stunts, but Harry didn't mind. As with his earlier police challenges, he was excited by the fame and attention. It wasn't hard to advertise himself now. Tens of thousands of people would come out to see one of his jumps. There was nothing Houdini liked better than a big crowd.